Hi, this is so exciting to do LinkedIn Live.
Hey, Michael.
David, good to see you. Hey, so
Hello,
first of
everybody.
all, I'm Michael Wolf, and I am the co-founder of Activate Consulting, and uh, and I'm really thrilled to be able to have this conversation today with David Kirkpatrick. And by way of background, David is really one of the most well-respected technology journalists and technology thinkers. He was technology editor for Fortune for many years. He created the famous Fortune Brainstorm Conference. 10 years ago, he founded Techonomy, which is a multi-platform media company, not just publishing in a website, but also an amazing set of conferences. And 10 years, 11 years ago, he wrote an incredible book called The Facebook Effect. And I would suggest if you read it, there's much there that reflects on today. And finally, one of my most phrases that I use all the time is that David described himself as one point as a technology determinist, which basically meant anybody who could do anything anybody could do with technology, they would. And that phrase follows me around everywhere I go. So David, it's really fun to be here with you.
Yeah, I think I still more or less believe that, although it seems darker now than it used to. Well, Michael, thank you so much for asking me to help you with this. It's really your show. We should just say, though, that the foundation for this is something called the Activate Technology and Media Outlook 2022, which is an astonishing, I have a printout of it here, vast collection of slides and data on all kinds of things. I mean, really amazing. One of the most thorough overviews I've ever seen of what's going on in technology. And what's really stunning to me about it is, it was very recently that if we had something like this, we'd be talking about, mobile users, mobile phone designs, number of people connected to the internet, to PC sales, advertising, and all those things are still important. But those have become like the foundation for a whole new set of things that we're probably going to spend more time talking about, because you go into them in such detail and they're so fascinating and they're fundamentally new. Notably, cryptocurrencies, NFTs, the metaverse, and then many things about gaming, which has been around for a long time, but as you will, I'm sure, say to us, it's getting much more important. So I wanted to start by asking.
Even when you look at the things that historically would have been important, like a great example of them is video. We're no longer talking, I mean, the television networks, cable programming, all those are important. But we're talking today about streaming services. We're talking about the fact that Americans are taking more streaming services. And then the phenomenon of short form video, the fact that TikTok is occupying so much, on average 20 minutes a month. That's average 20 minutes a month. That just gives you a sense. So like so many incredibly amazing things are happening, and they're not things that we would have talked about 5, 10 years ago.
Wait, are you saying the average American watches TikTok for 20 minutes a month?
A month. Yes.
All Americans? So that means some people are watching it for 20 minutes every hour, basically.
That's right. I mean, it's the average.
Right. So, well, I want to step back, though, and ask you to step back, because it is an extraordinary data trove, and your Activate team has put together an amazing bunch of data, and this is all publicly available. It's on the Activate website. Anybody can look at it. But when you step back from all of the minutia and all the logos and all the numbers, what's the big conclusion you draw from this in terms of where we are right now with technology and media?
Yeah, there are a couple of things. I mean, first of all, people are going to be spending more and more of their lives in a digital world, and whatever you might want to call it. And when you think about it more broadly, we're just seeing that more of people's lives, and of course, the pandemic really accelerated this. But so many parts of our worlds are now being touched in a way, and it isn't just like 5 years ago we would have talked about everybody becoming digital. It's not that. It's a great deal more. It's really the profound influence on every part of our lives, including it's social. Social is just the beginning. The metaverse, video gaming, these are all put together. And what we're going to see is more and more people are really trying to bridge the divide between what's their physical world and what's their digital world. And
Right.
those are two are going to come together in so many different ways.
Right. Well, it's interesting because buried deep in here at some point is the line that the line between the physical and the digital experience is blurring, which is very much in the news lately with,
Right.
Facebook changing its name to Meta and this whole idea of the metaverse having gone on everyone's lips just in the last 2 weeks because of that. Um, but quickly just say, how do you compile all this data? You've got a pretty good team of analysts. You've got a big company, Activate, that you run. And it must take a good amount of time to put together such a vast data set.
So first of all, our day jobs, what we do for a living is we're management consultants, and we work with technology and media companies and really helping them figure out how to grow their businesses. But about 6 or 7 years ago, we decided that there was so much knowledge that we had, there was so much of what we were seeing out in the world that we wanted to share that. And then there's the cynical side of it, which is that big management consulting firms, the legacy consulting firms, charge you a lot for industry information. And we decided, let's disrupt the business and give it away for free. But starting every January, our team gets together, and the average age of our team is about 27, but that really reflects the fact that we have a number of people who are highly experienced, who spent decades in the business world. And then we have a number of people who they're Gen Zers themselves, and they are deep in these industries. So starting in January, everybody meets. They think about, what do we think are the topics that are going to be important in the coming year. They vet them among each other. There's almost like a competition about which ones we're going to include. There's some, by the way, you have to talk about. You have to talk about video. You have to talk about audio. But there are many areas where we haven't covered in the past. And then from that moment on, we put together real teams of people, and they do this apart from their client work. They're doing this nights and weekends for the last 9 months or so.
Yeah, so it takes 9 months. It seems like it must have taken an enormous amount of time. I mean, it takes longer to really digest than a book, but every page is so rich. But let's go to one of the most amazing sections, and that's the cryptocurrencies part, because I think everybody's fascinated by that. And as a baby boomer who is probably among those in your statistical analysis that's a little more intimidated / skeptical / confused, tell us how you just give us the summary view of where that stands and why is it so central to this report?
The reality is that cryptocurrencies, we're expecting that one way or the other, we're going to go to a world where more and more of this is digital currency, and it's current digital currency that's decentralized, that is not dependent on a government or any other official entity. And that's why we find cryptocurrency so important, because so many parts of the technology ecosystem are really they require payment, and payment has to come from somewhere other than just beyond national boundaries. Over the last year or so, we've seen a massive amount of speculation around Bitcoin. And I was just talking to a friend of mine today. We were talking about the fact that Bitcoin, people thought everyone was nuts in buying Bitcoin at $100, and now here it is in the stratospheres. But what's fascinating about this today is those cryptocurrencies are not being used for transactions. They're not being used for payments. They're not being used to buy in-game items. They're largely about investment and speculation. And yet, when you look at cryptocurrency, you begin to see that this is a much more efficient vehicle for transactions. That if it's set up the right way, it can take a matter of seconds. Whereas if you think about a credit card or any sort of banking relationship, that can take days. So cryptocurrency becomes important, and it also sets the stage for so many other things that are going to happen, which includes more time spent in video games, more commerce inside of them, non-fungible tokens, NFTs, and metaverse.
Yeah. So is your presumption, if cryptocurrencies are going to be used for transactions? I mean, one of the reasons they haven't been, it seems to me, is because the valuation has vacillated so rapidly. Who wants to spend a Bitcoin today if it might be worth $5,000 more tomorrow, or similarly might be worth $5,000 less? I mean, I guess you would want to spend it today if you thought that.
Right.
But are you assuming that we'll see stable coins in particular, which would be tied to national currencies, or some other form of more stable crypto?
I think there's going to be, if you look at the numbers, we have roughly 60% of the market capitalization. If you could describe it, the overall value of cryptocurrency is between Bitcoin and Ethereum. But a lot of the innovation is going to come with that roughly 40% of other coins that are out there, some of which probably will be valuable and some of the won't. I think the reason why it's not being used for transactions isn't the question of the variability of value. It's just that the mechanisms aren't there. You think about a long time ago, we weren't sure if we wanted to use a credit card or not. We were worried, are you going to have to pay interest on it? Will it go through? Will the bank approve it? And I mean, like going back to the days where 30 years ago, if you would go to a store instead of going online to see if your credit card was okay, they'd literally open up a book and find the number. Well, we're in the find the number stage of cryptocurrency right now. We're very early in this.
Yeah, and you do chart and document a lot of organizations working toward taking crypto for transactional purposes, and that is very eye-opening, I must say. I found an impressive number in here. 17% of US adults traded cryptocurrency, I guess, within the last year. That sounds high to me.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? One way or the other, they've participated.
That is incredible. And you think it's going to double in the next 12 months?
We believe that this is, the more interest there is, the more this becomes something that people believe is around, that they can create value, that they can create some sort of wealth for themselves. And I mean wealth, I don't mean massive amounts, that they can, their value of their holdings can increase. And also we see that they don't have to buy a whole currency through a bunch of different sites. They can buy a piece of it. We believe that this is going to be a mainstream behavior. Now, I should point out, this doesn't mean that digital currencies that are controlled by governments aren't going to exist. A great example, the Chinese have been very smart. They've now created a digital version of the RMB. And so it makes takes all the paper out of the equation. Yes, it allows a lot more of a paper trail and and people are willing to give up privacy in doing so. But these in some ways are going to be less about speculation, and those are more about transactions.
Well, we know that companies like Square and PayPal have been getting behind crypto. You have an amazing page in here where you list all the major established financial institutions that are making major steps in that direction: Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Fidelity, etc. And you do have a really interesting thing on that same page related to China, which I'd love for you to talk about, just because I'm very fascinated with China and US-China relations. He says, China actively trying to stifle and ban crypto as an existential monetary threat. Now that made me wonder if what you're saying is, if Bitcoin or crypto in general becomes a real global phenomenon at scale, does that undermine Chinese control domestically at some point, potentially?
The Chinese have, it's a much broader conversation. We could spend this entire conversation about what's happening in China. But the Chinese actually, they got a glimpse of what cryptocurrencies and what alternative currencies could be a number of years ago with the QQ coin. The QQ coin is its own sort of quasi-digital currency that was created by Tencent, which is one of the largest video gaming companies, actually one of the largest technology companies in the world, and also controls and owns WeChat, which is the largest social network. Actually, in some ways, in China, WeChat is the internet. So the Chinese already got to see, and they didn't like the idea of a shadow currency for the RMB, because the shadow currency, you can't control it. So China is trying to not allow somebody else, some other force, whether it's another government, whether it's a decentralized group of people, to have any impact on its economy. Let's remember also, this takes place against the background of what's happening with China in the technology business more generally. The US banning Huawei and other companies that China was very proud of, means that we're getting to the point where we're seeing what, for want of a better phrase, Chinese techno-nationalism, where the Chinese will create their own operating systems, their own app stores, and their own digital currencies.
Well, to some extent, we're forcing them to do that with our embargoes too. I mean,
exactly.
If they can't get an operating system for their mobile phones from Google, they're going to have to build their own, right?
And they are, and the reality is that so many companies in so many countries don't want to be controlled by Google. The Chinese have a very good excuse to not only not even try to get back on Android, to really focus on their own.
I mean, we probably shouldn't dwell on it too much, because there's so many other things to talk about, but it really is an astonishingly interesting state of affairs there. Right. Let's go back to Bitcoin per se, though. Bitcoin and Ethereum, talk about what you think is going to happen. Give us your general predictions for those.
I believe that Bitcoin will continue to really be the dominant cryptocurrency, but I do believe that trees don't grow to the sky, and I believe that Bitcoin at some point it'll get repriced, and this has happened. If you look at any asset class, anything that's been influenced by digital, the largest companies, the largest, and in this case, digital currency will get repriced. Ethereum is actually more interesting for me, because Ethereum is the blockchain upon which non-fungible tokens and a lot of these other metaverse experiences are going to be built. And between the two, once again, I think they're going to increase in the percentage of the value of the market, but don't be surprised if something else doesn't come along where there's a lot more innovation.
Forgive me for asking. I know you don't really want to talk about specific companies because you work for so many of them, but when you say Ethereum is part of the platform on which metaverse experiences are going to be built, it makes me think, wait, isn't Facebook going to be this? I mean, is that a way potentially that one might say that Ethereum and Facebook are sort of in competition in some way?
I don't see them as competition. I think when you own a digital, if you want to talk about something like a digital good, non-fungible token, you've got to have a way of making sure that you're the only owner of it. And blockchain technology is really the best way of doing that. And that blockchain, Ethereum, is on a blockchain that enables you to do that. So I don't see, if Facebook is interested in building a metaverse platform that there's some level of interoperability with other platforms, then they're going to have to go with another cryptocurrency. They're not going to be able to create their own. And that's
really okay. That's fascinating.
I don't see any of these metaverse platforms. If they want to create their own digital currency, it's going to be used inside of their own platforms. Not something that's going to be used across the web or in other places.
So it's not that Facebook will not eventually succeed in building a cryptocurrency, which we know they've been trying to do for several years, but it may not be a massive global thing outside of their ecosystem.
Right, and no matter what people are participating in any of these ecosystems, if you want to participate across them, so for example, Roblox has something called Robux. And it's literally their currency. Well, nobody else. Facebook isn't going to accept Robux, nor is Fortnite. Right. So when you think about this idea that you have multiple metaverse platforms, it's going to be other applications that the interoperability will come from things like digital currency and other applications. Their idea, creating their own currency, it's really going to be a fool's errand for them. And they
But
try.
maybe real, yeah, sorry, go ahead, sorry.
Go ahead, David.
No, I was just going to say real-time currency exchanges might be something that's going to be a business opportunity for people like that. If you want to spend Robux inside, some other platform. It's interesting as we're talking, though, how all of these amazing new things, and crypto, NFTs, the metaverse, gaming, they really intersect and are intertwined. I mean, really, this is a set of technologies. It's like it's not one platform, it's an ecosystem that is a fundamentally new ecosystem. And that is, I think, even just dawning on me, even in the middle of this conversation. Is that the way you look at it?
It is. And it's fascinating. You asked earlier about how we put this together. But even an important piece of this is, what's the order? What's the logic? And for us, the logic, well, I mean, everything we do starts with the consumer and the user. So the logic starts with what consumers are going to do. But the logic goes from crypto to non-fungible tokens to NFTs to video games to metaverse. They're all part of the same world, and they're totally related, and they're totally, and to a large extent, they're all going to be dependent upon each other.
Right. Really interesting. I want to just say that we are eager to hear questions or comments from anybody. I have plenty of questions, but if you want to ask Michael something, you can reply to the tweet, since we're pretty much on Twitter mainly now at this point, or you can mention @ActivateINC, and that will give you, we'll see your question that way. One of the things that is connected to all this, let's talk about NFTs more specifically. One of the most amazing sentences that I found in here, which I have to say I resisted a little, was every tech and media company needs an NFT strategy. That's a very strong statement. Why?
Why do they need that? Because we've got technology companies. Let's start with media. Media has large amounts of intellectual property, whether it's licenses, it's clips of video. There are a massive amount of IP that's in these companies, and one of the ways in which they're going to release some of that value is letting other people own it. The other reason is that non-fungible tokens, in some ways, they don't act as something you just bought. They have other pieces of it attached, like royalties. So the example that I find very compelling is that if you're a bet player and you license your name, your likeness for a trading card, you only get paid when that card gets printed onto cardboard. If it's a non-fungible token, then you get paid every time that card trades hands.
Right.
And it's why we're seeing, Redbird Capital started with a number of the Players Association, started something called the One Team Approach, because suddenly the players realized it isn't good enough for me just to pay for licensing my likeness to a card. It's more important that I'm going to get paid every time that card trades. And that's where there's value. So media companies, it's IP. Technology companies, because also we're going to see a great number of transactions, and this is going to have an impact. It's going to be, are you going to be, if you're in e-commerce, you're going to want to sell and buy non-fungible tokens. So everywhere we go, we think this is a real phenomenon. Now, I'm not sure if this is something that's a bubble, if it becomes, what's the value? And I'm even skeptical about some of these things that have traded up until today.
It wasn't until looking through your slides that I discovered something I should have known, that Tom Brady co-founded a company called Autograph, to trade digital sports memorabilia, which is basically NFTs with Tiger Woods, Naomi Osaka, Derek Jeter involved. I mean, that's extremely interesting, and it makes sense. I never quite understood the sports memorabilia thing, but it's no less logical to have a digital thing that only you have the right to ownership, I suppose.
But David, what's important is this is once again a place where people are thinking about this as speculation. And non-fungible tokens, they key into a number of core behaviors, and that people are already doing in other places. And one of those behaviors is collecting. And the thing is, though, just because you buy an NFT doesn't mean it's something you're going to trade right away or it's worth something. I come back to my baseball card analogy. If I own a baseball card, if it's not one of the most valuable cards that's going to be sold at Christie's or Sotheby's, the main place I'm going to trade it is on eBay. And a lot of times my card may be valuable to me because I enjoy it, but nobody else will care. So this is not, everybody looks at these things and thinks, I'm going to make a lot of money. I'm going to sell a non-fungible token. The people who are going to make money at this point are the ones who have IP and are selling it.
Right.
The idea that this is going to be some sort of an active marketplace, well, a lot of assets have no value once you buy them. And so you enjoy them. They are owning them is much more about prestige than it's about earning money.
Okay, I want to get to something about the users, but before we do, you have a very interesting bunch of slides and data about the intersection between games and the metaverse. Yes. So first of all, tell us what, in your opinion, the metaverse is, and why are games so intrinsic to it?
Yeah. Well, you can't help but notice everywhere that people are talking about the metaverse, and since Facebook renamed itself, you can't escape it. I'm getting sick of seeing it. And everybody talks about it in different things. They say it's VR and AR. They say it's some magical other world. I would say for the moment, this all goes through games, because games are the only place where you have large numbers of people already interacting. The technology is there. The users are at scale. The interaction is there. And already people are doing so many non-game activities inside of games. And our research shows that 60% of gamers today are doing something else inside of a game, whether they're listening to a concert, they're socializing with friends, they're sending messages. And we believe that everything you can do today in the digital world, or many things in the real world, you're going to be able to do inside of games. So we talk about metaverse, but we believe that the next technology platform really begins with games. And virtual reality and augmented reality become important as they're part of those games versus something you just do on your own. So the overlap there, and there are a lot of people who would disagree with us, but there's nothing out there that has this level of technology, crowds, IP, interaction, and already people doing things.
And and a lot of people have talked about, for example, Niantic being one of the companies that's really in the lead with its augmented reality approach. And it does suggest to I did write a book about Facebook. I tend to think too much of everything through that lens, but Facebook's not really in gaming per se. They don't really have that as a business now. And
slowly, they are moving. They are buying platforms. I mean, I think. So I'm sorry, David, I interrupted you, but I think.
No, go ahead.
The main point is, if games are so important, every one of the major technology platforms are going to buy their way into the gaming business.
And that's the kind of thing I wanted you to say. Yes.
Right, like Microsoft. When we consider
they're already there.
There's a page in the report that shows what we are calling the gaming stack. Microsoft. They're already there. You're absolutely right. Microsoft, they have every element you can imagine. Sony has every element you can imagine. You've got a place. Google is assembling some pieces. We forget Amazon already. Amazon has games. They have Twitch, which is the largest game streaming platform. So all of the major tech companies, and Facebook slowly but surely is moving into this. And of course, you've got Oculus and with virtual reality, which is an important place for Facebook to play. Over half of all of the people who are using virtual reality headsets today are gamers.
Right.
It's not people putting on a headset and walking around and trying to do something else. They're playing games. And of those people who are using headsets, that are gamers, they're using those headsets for something else in addition to games.
Closely related is esports, which
Yes.
you have some extremely gung-ho data about in here also. Talk about that and how it fits in.
It's so fascinating. Esports, when 5 or 6 years ago, we started talking about esports, and we actually said that we thought esports was going to be one of the biggest trends in technology.
Just
And
define it in case anybody here doesn't know what it is.
so
Just some
esports
sunlight.
is literally spectator video games. You watch people playing video games. That it
Huge
has
business.
huge. Well, we have 500 million people today globally who are watching esports. We forecast that within 3 years, it's going to be 700 million. Now, many of them are people who play these games, but the majority of them are not. And similar to other sports, you've got players that you follow. There are sponsorships. There's action. You've got different games. I can be playing, Dota 2 and other games like that. And it's fascinating. This is a phenomenon that began in Asia, and it's the strongest in Asia. So we only see roughly 50 million people of that 500 million today. 10% of it's in the U.S.
A lot
But
of these things began in Asia. I mean, really, a lot of the whole virtual goods thing, that totally began in Asia.
yes,
Is
began with
that
World
likely
of
to continue? Do you think, is Asia going to continue to sort of be in the lead of consumer digital experience?
Asia's been in the vanguard, and there's a bunch of reasons, and one of them is that the development talent for games and other things just tends to exist in Asia. There are very few. If you look at how popular mobile games are, they're enormously popular, but most of them are created in Asia. There are very few successful mobile games that have been created in the U.S. And yes, in Asia, the phenomenon of playing games and winning virtual goods came about from China because somebody wanted to buy those virtual goods, and it's been the last 20 years. So I do believe a lot of these trends begin in Asia, but a lot of their commercialization happens outside of Asia.
Right, absolutely. So we have a question from somebody who's watching. How will NFTs and gaming impact traditional financial firms and institutions? Interesting question. If at
Yeah.
all, I mean, will they affect it?
Yeah, I believe they will. I believe that we are going to see more transactions. We are going to see, from a payments perspective, it's going to be important. But let's not forget also that if you're going to live in a virtual world, you're going to need to do all the things you typically do. You're going to need to bank, you're going to invest, and you may be one of the best examples of this is that there is a site called Decentraland. Decentraland, you buy real estate. There's another one, Upland, and literally you can buy digital real estate, virtual real estate. The analogy is at the beginning stages of the web, it was important you had a web page and you owned a URL. And the same thing is true here. So I think banks are going to play, and traditional financial institutions are going to play an important role. Let's not be surprised very soon that these will have to be, whatever financial institutions will have to be, banks are approved by the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, virtual real estate seems very closely related to NFTs to me too. I want to go to your whole issue of super users, and we don't have tons more time, but I want to wait before we get to that. You more than anybody I know spend a lot of time talking to the moguls of all, and especially media moguls, but I know you also work more and more with technology companies as traditionally defined. But given your deep...
Yeah, 70% of our business today is with technology companies.
But still, all of the media moguls.
Of course,
now, when you talk, do they get this, all this stuff?
I think more and more they do. They and remember, a lot of cases we're on to a new generation of people, of moguls. You've got an older generation who are less relevant. Today you have so many people that are important in this. And look, even the ones that are historically, I think that everybody, they're learning, they're listening. All of the people that are running these companies, whether it's media companies or technology companies, they're out there listening in any one moment. They're talking to people. They're trying to understand what's going on. So I do believe they get it.
Okay, let's talk about super users. I think we've got about 5 or 8 more minutes here. But you have a hilarious statistic in here, which is that actually, if you just base it on research that you do, the average American is living a 32-hour day, which is quite amusing. First of all, explain that, and then I want to dig down into the different kinds of users.
So for the last 7 or 8 years, when we started doing this, we have done consumer research around where people are spending their time during the course of a day. And what we found is that when you consider multitasking, and most activities, most technology and media activities are multitasked. You're watching, yes, you may be watching Squid Game on Netflix, but you also may be at the same time texting with your friends. You may be looking at Instagram. There's so many activities that are taking place at the same time. So if you add up all of those multitask activities, you end up with 31 hours a day. And on average, you end up with 13 hours a day of technology and media activity. Okay, so you wonder, really, could this be true? Well, just step back for a moment. The average American is watching 5 hours a day of television.
Still. Yeah.
Still. The number was higher before. And so
that's still
you start between television, audio, video games, surfing the web, social. It's not surprising, these numbers, that the average American is spending not only this much time, but more and more time. And let's not forget, even when you're at work, people are at work, a lot of those moments are stolen, and people are doing other things.
But then you have this really interesting way of dividing the population into 26% of them are super users, whose time, and oh, by the way, time with media of the average American you calculate as 13 hours a day, divided one way or another. That's an incredible number. If you include video, audio, gaming, messaging, etc. That doesn't even include emailing for work and stuff, right?
No. But David, it's that number is increasing. The pandemic, that whole line. So a couple of years ago, but in 2019, we saw that as 12 hours. Now it's jumped. And if you go to specific activities, you see like video gaming, there's been a very large increase, even though it came from a high bar. So you want to talk about super users?
Yeah, well, the thing about super users, you calculate that 26% of US adults are super users, and they average 17 hours a day on digital media.
Right. And so why is that? It shouldn't be so surprising, because they're doing multiple things at a time. And if they're watching video games, if they're playing video games, they may be listening to music. But seeing is this phenomenon of a small percentage of users, so 25% of users, accounting not just for the majority of time, but also for the majority of spending. So 80% of all spend on video games is those 26%. Over 75% on e-commerce is those people. And why is this important? Because a couple years ago, you could grow internet businesses based on just the fact that the population, more and more people, the penetration of internet was growing up. More people were actually finding their way into the internet. Now the market's saturated. Pretty much everybody buys online. And pretty much everybody, one way or the other, is listening to music and doing these other things. And so now you're at a point where companies need to find those super users. We talked earlier about every company needs an NFT strategy. Every company needs a super user strategy, because you're not going to grow. So we have one of our clients in e-commerce, one of the largest e-commerce companies. They're framing their entire strategy around super buyers, super consumers, because they know that that's the place they can spend the money to acquire consumers. They know those are the people who are going to buy. And also because they're super users, those are the people who are going to try ahead of time and tell their friends, and they're going to be the amplifiers. And we
Right.
see this trend, these super users, we see them across so many different parts of technology and media behavior. It's
Yeah,
and it's some.
there's one, yeah. Go on,
Go
sorry.
ahead, David. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say you've got one really great slide where you show they're younger, they're richer, they're better educated than the rest of Americans. That 55% of super users have a household income more than 100,000 a year. That's kind of
Yes.
on a very appealing piece of data for the kind of company you were just describing. I don't mean to be pushy, but I want to just make sure we get to this one question that was sitting here waiting to be asked,
Okay.
which you may not want to answer considering the nature of it, but I'm going to ask it anyway from at Myers BizNet is his handle there. As you look at the large legacy media companies, which ones are best and worst positioned to capitalize on the metaverse?
The challenge is that the legacy media companies are all merging together to be able to compete in this environment. And so we've seen, we're seeing, if you look at the largest companies, they're all arming up. I mean, in just the last couple of years, we see Disney took over all of the Fox assets, the 21st Century Fox assets, plus buying Marvel, plus buying Lucasfilm. You see Discovery merges with Warner. I mean, each of these companies, you see Viacom and CBS getting back together again. Over and over again, you see these companies, they're reconfiguring themselves. Some of them are simplifying themselves down. I mean, Fox, they're focusing in on the businesses that they have that are the most important: sports, news, their networks, and Tubi. And so I look around and I think that most of the companies that are in place today are well suited for this. And I think the ones that aren't, they're going to find they're either owned by somebody else or they're going to lose their value. I mean, I think that
Okay.
the best example is this is what's happened with Meredith. Meredith goes out, they buy Time Inc., they double down the magazine business, and they end up getting sold to IAC because
Yeah.
being bigger didn't help them.
Interesting. Listen, okay, we're winding down here, but I have a big picture question for you to end with.
Sure.
You know, you're immersed in this stuff. You know, you're not as old as me, but you're not a young person. You know, you have big picture views of the world. When you look at where the world is heading, you know, we've got a climate crisis very obviously right now. We've got, you know, very serious threats to democracy in many parts of the world. And meanwhile, we've got this extraordinary shift to all these digital experiences. When you think about what all this means for the future of people and our lives at the macro scale, and does it make you more optimistic about where we're headed as a civilization, as humanity, or less?
It makes me more optimistic. And the reason it makes me more optimistic is because I think the extent to which, I mean, what you really come down to is people are relationships. And in some ways, the social relationships that have happened through today's major social media, they're contrived. That there is a central platform controlling them, that amplifying messages. And I really believe that a lot of the problems that we're facing in terms of divisions, not just in this country, but everywhere else, have come from social media and have come from the sort of misuse of it. And as we get into areas like metaverse, where people can interact with people they know and they can meet new people in a much more authentic way, I'm much more excited about this. I also think we're going to see that metaverse platforms are going to be forces for good. I think there are ways in which people become, it's much better if you're learning about something. If you're in Roblox, you're learning about conservation, you're learning about the impact of the environment versus just reading an article about it.
Wow. That's a really interesting point of view, and maybe even mildly promising for Facebook, considering they've got a hole to dig themselves out of, clearly. Anything you want to add that, you know, we used to say at Fortune, you know, what did I forget to ask you? Anything you wanted to tell this audience we haven't hit on, Michael?
Yeah, I think that that probably one of the most important things that all of us can do is no matter what our current ideology in media, we should all be aware of what else is happening out there. And people always ask me, well, I'm not real, I don't really understand this, whatever, but you have to. You have to. It's one of the reasons why we create this report every year, because
Right.
people who think this isn't something that affects me, it's not important to me, it has wide-ranging effects, even if you're not in the technology or media business.
Yeah.
And you really can't escape it. And if you don't understand it, whatever business that you're in, whether you're in restaurants or you're in trucking or you're in banking, these worlds are all merging, and you have to understand it.
Right. And the way that anybody who's watching can find this, they go to activate.com and go to Insights, and it's right there on the next page. So, Michael, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for asking me to join you. And thank you to everyone watching. And I'm just amazed that we have to understand all this stuff, because a lot of it's pretty confusing. But it's
David,
fascinating. Thank you so much.
David, thank you. You've spent so much of your career really on looking at having the foresight about where things are going, and it's such a pleasure to get to talk to you. And I'm even more fortunate as your friend. I get to go so often. So thank you.
You give me a lot of good ideas, as you know. So thank you so much.
Great. Be safe, everybody.
Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.